this video, we are going to talk with Stéphane Eliès about parenting, about being a parent of a child with ADHD.
When we talk about this topic, we obviously immediately think of the difficulty of managing daily life with a child who is hyperactive and impulsive or has problems with behavioral adjustments. But a parent questioning begins long before that, when the mother or father tries to understand why his or her child is having difficulties at school, what makes it difficult for him to function or find her place with the other children at school. Sometimes we are alerted by a symptom secondary to difficulties, such as a drop in self-esteem due to the difficulty caused by attention problem or hyperactivity. The search for an answer then begins. As parents, we often feel responsible for our children functioning. We look for the answer in what we have done or not done in terms of education, the limits we have or have not set, having let our child have too much screen time, etc. Even though the information available today on ADHD leads to a better understanding and knowledge with a diagnosis that can quickly be evoked by school psychologist or the pediatrician, but access to a quality diagnosis by professionals who are able to give us reliable, open information, specific therapeutic recommendation, and useful to the particular or specific profile of our child can take some time. Ideally, these meetings with therapists, once the diagnosis has been established, include both parents to allow for a convergence of perspective on what ADHD is. These sessions, which are called psychoeducation sessions, include sharing ideas, information, and reflection on how to parent a child or a teen with ADHD. Detailed information on psychoeducation have been presented in another video in which Martin Debannet has showed the need to find a dynamic to manage difficulties on a daily basis, a mentalizing dynamic. Another role that often falls to the parents of a child with ADHD is that of the treatment management. In the case of a child with ADHD, the role that often falls to the parent is to ensure that necessary psychotherapeutic support, psychoeducation, and proper follow-up of the pharmacological treatment is put into place. The complexity of the treatment and the time required for the various aspects of the treatment will be obstacles to the child and his family's long-term commitment. Since attention deficit is a difficulty that tends to persist over time, it is important that the strategy agreed upon between the parents and the therapist take these elements into account in order to minimize the risk of exhaustion and ultimately of the child's opposition to the various therapeutic proposals. In the case of an adolescent, it is obviously essential, as we have seen in the sequence on therapeutic guidelines, to be able to systematically involve the young person in decisions concerning his or her treatment. There is obviously no point in the participation in the treatment or taking of medication becoming a form of struggle between the parents who want the child to adhere to the treatment and the child who rejects the therapeutic proposals.
So Stéphane Eliès just discussed the role of the parent in the diagnosis of ADHD and also in the treatment of ADHD difficulties. But what comes at the forefront usually is really the questions about how can we support our child to manage the difficulties on a daily basis. So we have seen in a previous sequence that parental training and parental support is really part of the guidelines for young children who are diagnosed early with ADHD. For older children, psychoeducation session can also be the place to discuss very concrete strategies to deal with the difficulties at home, for example. But what should be noted is that difficulties usually evolve over time and not always remain the same. So in that regard, it's often useful to have sessions from time to time with a therapist to discuss these very concrete strategies and to see really what could be useful in the daily life. In that regard, we are going to hear the testimonies of Finian's mother, a 13-year-old teenager who was diagnosed with ADHD and who is also dealing with learning difficulties and anxiety difficulties. She's going to discuss about what is useful and what she needs and what she expects as a parent from a professional.
It's really practical. It's really skills and techniques for him to use in his daily life, to manage anxiety, to manage when he becomes stressed, to manage when he's overwhelmed, to figure out how to tackle Amat's feet, to plan his day. So it's really practical, what I hope and expect. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got when he was younger was, you know, an hour and a half for a play date, 2 hours is long enough. Mm-hmm. So he has his limits.
So in this short sequence, Finian's mother really explained that she really expects from professionals to really think and elaborate very concrete strategies to deal with very specific situations. This is especially true because as parents, they are usually at the forefront of managing the attentional and organizational difficulties of their child. But as they grow older, when they become adolescents, it's also the role of parents to help them to autonomize and to develop their own strategies. Another question that often arises when accompanying parents of children with ADHD is that parents usually play the role of the mediator within the network of professionals, especially with the school system. So we are going to hear one more time Finian's mother, who is going to discuss what was useful for her as a parent to interact with this professional and to intervene efficiently in this network.
Some psychologists, some particularly, have explained things in ways that have really helped me, such as executive function is like a table. You can't put more than 7 things on a table. And if I have that explanation, that helps me explain it to other people. And that's been really useful. So, because I also have to explain it to his teacher, to my family, to all the other people he interacts with. So I can go into meetings armed with the information and the explanation to say, this is why he's behaving like this. And if we make these changes, we can help him and change. And in the past, I've gone in with psychiatrists, with his psychologist, with his speech therapist, and we've really got teachers on board from small changes. And it's really, that's been how we've managed his education the whole way through. And it's been really successful.
So in this short sequence, you have listened to Finian's mother, who mentioned that it was so useful for her to really be well informed about the potential strategies that are useful for her child, so that she could also be a part of the solution in the network of the different professionals and really be well informed about that. So the last thing we are going to discuss in this sequence is what are the specific challenges when the parents himself or herself has ADHD. So you have listened in the previous sequence that there is a high heritability in ADHD. So it's often the case that parents have the same type of difficulties than their children. So there are several studies showing that having ADHD oneself does not at all prevent from creating a very positive interaction with one child. There are specific difficulties that have been described as parents when oneself have ADHD. There can be a lack of consistency in the rules that are applied at home. There can be also organizational difficulties, such as managing the time schedule or having everything ready for a school outing, for example. And there can be also a difficulty to maintain a calm and organized environment at home that is well equipped for learning, for example. So it's a very important recommendation to take care of our own health as a parent, to be able also to accompany your child in the difficulties that ADHD can represent in the daily life.